This video was sponsored by From.co. Anyone care to guess which film is depicted by these color strips? Answer at the end of the video. This video has been in development for a long time. I don't mean months, I don't even mean years.
Hi, my name's Serge Bonarchuk and welcome to the University of Chicago.
When I was a freshman in college, I made a 38-minute documentary about student life, which is literally one of the cringiest things I have ever put my name on. God, I can't even watch this. Get a load of that glow up though. I called it Everything I Know I Learned from the Movies and the University of Chicago. The idea was that every bit of life advice I could ever give someone about life in college had a corresponding precedent somewhere in cinema.
If there's one thing the University of Chicago and the movies can agree on, is that you're never over-prepared for cold weather.
You'll have 20 meters to cover.
At minus 273 degrees Celsius.
And the running joke was that I didn't consider musicals to be a real film genre.
Movies, not musicals. Okay? Let me make that distinction clear.
I say joke because at the end of the video, my friend kidnaps me and forces me to watch a full day's worth of musicals. Which is to say he forces me to watch Moulin Rouge and A Knight's Tale, because those were the only two films I owned back then that had any musical numbers in them. And I come out the other side with a newfound appreciation for the form.
He showed me all those musicals?
Yes. I need to show you the light.
Thing is, I never actually did the work of watching a bunch of musicals before I made that video. I just had this gut feeling that musicals were meant to be enjoyed in certain ways that I wasn't getting, and that figuring it out someday might do me some good. Well, here we are almost 13 years later, and I'm pleased to report I have finally started that work.
If you change your mind, take a chance, I'm the first in line. Honey, I'm still free. Take a chance on me.
Longtime fans of the channel know that I have previously self-identified as someone who just can't get into musicals. I said it in a video as recently as last year. So try to love and just can't. I can't get into musicals. But I always knew I wanted to seriously reevaluate that opinion. Because for someone who just can't get into musicals, I sure do own a lot of them. 15 at the time of this recording. I've even been fond of telling people that 3 of my all-time favorite films just so happen to be musicals. And yet whenever it comes up, I tell people I'm not a fan. What's going on here? What's really happening when I tell people I can't get into musicals? I don't do that with any other film genre. There are plenty of horror films and horror film tropes that I absolutely despise, but I don't go around telling people that I just can't get into horror films. Why has my brain singled out musicals like this? Apologies in advance if you thought this was going to be like some in-depth examination of the history and form of the movie musical. In the end, it's probably not even going to be a decent survey course. There's no Bollywood, only one Fred Astaire, only one Gene Kelly, only one Judy Garland, and it's not A Star is Born. This is more an examination of my own personal tastes, and how I've apparently been using those tastes to try and codify my identity as an artist. So rather than starting with the history of the musical, or the development of the form, we're going to start with my entry point, which also just so happens to be why this video will never be monetized. Part 1. My history with movie musicals. I don't remember the first musical I ever saw, but I do remember the first musical I ever fell in love with.
Little town, it's a quiet village. Every day, like the one before.
Beauty and the Beast is a film I've seen so many times I don't even remember the first time I saw it. What's not to love? It's got a great story, so long as you don't nitpick it in bad faith. It's got some of the best voice acting of a generation. It's shorter than 2 episodes of Mad Men, and there isn't a single bad song in the entire movie.
I use antlers in all of my decorating.
I pre-ordered the Blu-ray over a year in advance, because that's how long Disney used to stagger their back catalog releases back in the late aughts. After Beauty and the Beast came the rest of the Disney and DreamWorks animated musicals of the 1990s and early 2000s, with Mulan, The Road to El Dorado, The Lion King, Nightmare Before Christmas, and The Prince of Egypt being my personal favorites. And by favorites, I mean I liked them enough to rebuy them as an adult. But looking back on it, there really weren't that many animated musicals from this time that I didn't like, just some that I was more apathetic about. Aladdin is great, Hercules is fun, and even though Pocahontas has some rather disconcerting historical revisionism in it, ah yes, and the Europeans never bothered the Native Americans again. Colors of the Wind is still an occasion.
Need to paint with all the colors of the wind.
I also remember rewatching The Jungle Book, James and the Giant Peach, Charlotte's Web, Little Mermaid, Fern Gully, The Brave Little Toaster, a Goofy movie, and at least one of the Land Before Time sequels pretty regularly as a kid. But my musical watching didn't stop at animation. My gateway into the world of live-action musicals were such puppet-heavy classics as Labyrinth, Muppet Christmas Carol, and Little Shop of Horrors, 2 of which I still own. And it's not just that I own them. Mere ownership can be a pretty pithy indicator of my opinion of any given film. I also technically own Alien vs. Predator Requiem, but only because I needed a clip one time for a video and buying the used Blu-ray was literally cheaper than renting it digitally. But when I say I own Little Shop of Horrors, I mean it's like spiritually restorative to me. Skid Row is my second favorite musical number of all time. It recenters me in ways that most people would only describe as a religious experience. I put it on when I need to keep the demons at bay.
Please won't somebody say I'll get out of here? Someone give me my shot or I'll rot here.
And my all-time favorite musical number is from a film I've already mentioned, but it honestly feels like telling you which one it is would give you too much power over me. No chance, no way, I won't say it. No. So then high school started, which was a really formative era for me in movies. It's when I started to really examine the ways that films affected me, and when I started watching lots of different kinds of films to see what I liked. This was the mid-2000s, which you might remember also coincided with a sudden revival of interest in the movie musical. Remember some of the musicals that came out that decade? Chicago, The Producers, Sweeney Todd, Across the Universe, Repo the Genetic Opera, 9. I know there were a lot more than that, and we'll get to them, but these were the musicals I saw when they came out. And I was, underwhelmed, to say the least.
And she was virtuous, and he was
oblivious.
naive.
Aww. But I was also really active in high school theater, where I was surrounded by diehard musical fans, who kept insisting I keep exploring the genre. And so I did, but soon enough, all I had was a list of stuff I tended not to like about musicals. There comes a time in every movie musical, when the camera pulls in close, the ambient audio drops out, a melody of unknown origin cuts in, and the vocal track switches over to what is painfully obvious ADR, before someone finally bursts into song.
I got chills, they're multiplying.
It's jarring. There's a fine line between breaking the fourth wall and messing with my ability to suspend my disbelief. I know the whole concept of a musical is that people are going to burst into song and sing their feelings at some point, but when the transition from speaking to singing calls this much attention to itself, I find myself thinking more about the form rather than the story, and I'm left wondering what the point of including the music is at all. These are catchy ditties, don't get me wrong. But I've never watched a non-musical and thought, you know what that movie needed? Musical numbers. As far as I'm concerned, musical numbers can't save a film that's already bad, but they can make a film worse if they're not used carefully, so songs are always a risk. They're like super stylized fight scenes or unnecessary CGI. You better know what you're doing or you're gonna screw things up. There's something inherently self-conscious about musical numbers too. Something fundamentally performative about them in a really off-putting way. Hello Dolly only just started and already Barbra Streisand's doing this winky-faced, self-congratulatory look at me bit, which will then continue for the entire 2.5-hour runtime of the film. It might be one of the most self-conscious performances I've ever seen. The kind of performance that's probably perfect for theater, but in film it just feels like she's gonna turn to the camera and wait for an applause break at the end of each line. I'm not even blaming Barbra Streisand here. I've seen her in other films. I know she can act, but everything about the music in Hello Dolly just rubs me the wrong way. There's a difference between having a good time and demanding approbation. And I know someone will probably call me a hypocrite in the comments for having previously praised the musical number in The First Wives Club, which has similarly been described as self-congratulatory by its critics. But the crucial difference for me is that the performances in First Wives Club, and Diane Keaton's performance in particular, is decidedly unself-conscious. Keaton sings like there's no one else in the room. Streisand sings like the whole world needs to know what she's gonna say next, and she can't wait not to tell us. And I know I'm not the only one who got irked by all this, because Hello Dolly almost single-handedly tanked the big-budget Hollywood musical in the 3 decades following its release. Lots of movie musicals feel less like proper films and more like someone just recorded a stage musical for 2 or 3 different angles and then cut it together in post. The Producers feels a lot like that. They actually went and hired the literal director of the stage show to direct the 2005 movie adaptation, so it's no wonder the finished product doesn't feel very filmic to me. People just sort of clomp around the sets. It all feels like the action was blocked in only 2 dimensions. Camera angles are flat and static. Most of the people are filmed from the same height, with the same basic framing, and the only time they mix it up is for these metatextual jokes that fall super flat.
Bloom go so far, camera right?
I know it sounds like I'm just looking for things to nitpick at this point, but look at this exchange from the Producers' trailer.
Let's assume for a moment that you are a dishonest man.
Assume away.
That's funny. That reaction shot made me laugh out loud in the previews. But here's that exchange in the actual film.
Let's assume for a moment that you are a dishonest man.
Assume away.
It's so much less arresting, so much more perfunctory. There's no juxtaposition in the cut. They're literally just switching to a different camera angle. So how nitpicky am I being, really, when the damn trailer has better editing than the film itself? Then in a later scene, when Bialystok and Bloom are auditioning actors to play Hitler, we see a whole bunch of them try out, one after the other, and as the scene goes on and on, I start thinking to myself, shouldn't this have been a montage? Speaking of going on and on, I am of the humble opinion that lots, if not most, movie musicals are too long. They're just too damn long. I say this as someone who loves The Sound of Music, by the way. It's not that you can't have a great film that's over 2 hours long, but oftentimes the songs just feel like they're padding the length to the detriment of the plot. I think the very best musicals use their songs to advance the plot, but musical numbers often have the exact opposite effect. They bring the action to a screeching halt. West Side Story is just over 2.5 hours long, and it's not like I think every song in the film is a slog, but just by way of an example, right after Bernardo and Riff were killed at the Rumble, 59-year-old spoiler alert, the Jets regroup in this parking garage, and some of the more hot-headed members of the gang start plotting their revenge. Then all of a sudden, the action comes to a dead stop when one of the boys launches into this song about how everyone needs to calm down.
Don't get hot, 'cause man, you've got some high times ahead.
It's not like this is a bad song, but it's not doing the pacing any favors. This goes on for 4 minutes. This is the start of the 3rd act. Things shouldn't be slowing down right now, they should be speeding up. N'est-ce pas?
Just play it cool, boy. Real cool.
And even when you get a great song in a brisk musical that's flawlessly performed and expertly staged, sometimes it feels like it's just in the wrong spot. When You're Good to Mama is one of my favorite songs in all of Chicago, second only to Cell Block Tango.
Ask any of the chickies in my pen. They'll tell you I'm the biggest mother hen.
But I can't shake the feeling that it's not in the right place. The song is intercut with Mama Morton introducing herself to a bunch of new inmates, and then escorting Roxy to her cell, which is fine, I guess. I mean, it's fine. I don't want to exaggerate. It's not a terrible choice. This is Mama Morton's introductory scene, so maybe it makes sense to give her an introductory song, I don't know. But look what happens just a couple minutes later. Roxy goes to Mama Morton and asks her for a favor, and then Mama Morton demands reciprocity in return.
How do you get this, Billy Flynn?
Well, not by praying, dearie. First, you give me $100.
Which is exactly what the song When You're Good to Mama is all about. And I ask myself, why not put the song here, when she's doing the very thing she's describing in the song? Juxtaposition is supposed to enhance meaning and emotion, but the placement of the song here just makes it feel like an exposition dump. And look, it's not like I sat down and came up with a list of all the things that I think musicals shouldn't do, and then I watched a bunch of them, and I gave them all a ding every time they did one of those things, and if they got too many dings, I decided I didn't like them. I don't think I consciously decide what to think about any film. I literally just watch them and see how they make me feel. Everything that follows is just me trying to suss out why they made me feel that way. There are plenty of musicals that I just don't know why I don't like them. Sweeney Todd has a lot of things going for it on paper, but it makes me feel nothing. Across the Universe, same deal. But priming is important too. It's important to know what you're watching a film for. And for the longest time, I felt like I wasn't judging musicals fairly. Then, a high watermark in my high school experience. I saw Moulin Rouge. Which immediately became one of my favorite films of all time. I love how big the emotions are, and how good the film is at switching between tones.
My dear, a little frog.
How they recontextualize all these songs in order to mine completely different emotions out of them. Like, this is easily my all-time favorite rendition of Like a Virgin.
Feels so good inside.
It's colorful, even when it's dark. I love the madcap energy and dreamscape production design. The story is an oldie, but a goodie. Boy and girl have a meet cute to end all meet cutes.
Not a duke. Not a duke. I'm a writer.
But then circumstance and a predatory ruling class conspire to keep them apart.
It's not that I'm a jealous man. I just don't like other people touching my things!
I also love the story within a story angle.
What's the story?
The story?
Well, if I'm to invest, I'll need to know the story.
Which helps blur the line between diegetic and non-diegetic musical numbers.
Spectacular, spectacular, no words in the vernacular can describe this great event. You'll be done with wonderment.
But then the first time I told some of the musical fans that I knew at school how much I love Moulin Rouge, one of the very first responses I got was, "Oh, that's not a real musical. They didn't write their own songs." Well, they did write Come What May and Spectacular, Spectacular, but otherwise, I mean, sure, there are a lot of covers in there. I didn't realize that meant it wasn't a real musical, though. Then a couple of years later, I saw my second favorite musical of all time, The Blues Brothers. And my God, what's not to like?
Shake it out, baby.
The setting, the story, the deadpan humor.
She caught the key. Left me you.
Car's got a lot of pickup.
The years ahead of its time, ACAB energy, Carrie Fisher blowing shit up. Oh, and this, of course.
Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis.
But the next time I was hanging out with a bunch of self-described musical fans, when they asked me if I liked musicals and I said, yeah, I love the Blues Brothers, someone said, no, that's not a real musical either. All the songs are diegetic.
Sweet home, Chicago.
Well, some are, sure, but not all of them. It does that thing that Moulin Rouge does, where it sort of blurs the line between in-universe musical performances and non-diegetic musical numbers. But I didn't realize that meant it wasn't a real musical either. Anyway, this is about the same time I started telling people I just didn't like musicals, because people told me I didn't. Then finally, in December of 2018, I saw The Sound of Music for the first time, part 3 of my personal triumvirate of all-time favorite musicals.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
For those who haven't had the viewing pleasure, the first 2/3 of the film is a really cute romance, where this nun who doesn't fit in at the convent is sent to teach music to the 7 kids of a widowed Austrian naval officer. At first, the relationship is entirely antagonistic.
Fräulein, were you this much trouble at the Abbey?
Oh, much more, sir.
But soon enough, they fall in love and get married. This is where the original broadcast used to end in Germany, because then the Nazis invade. And the family has to figure out how to escape the country after all their friends and neighbors go full fasci. When the producers told the city of Salzburg that they planned to hang big Nazi banners in the town square for filming, the city officials balked. But when the filmmakers told them that their backup plan was to use actual archive footage of Salzburg welcoming Hitler into the city with a parade, they quickly agreed to let them hang the banners. It's a great film. Fantastic music, a clever story with sky-high stakes, badass nuns, the living embodiment of happiness and joy, and this shot. And perhaps best of all, this time I knew no one could tell me it wasn't a musical.
There's a sad sort of clanging from the clock in the hall.
And it's true, no one did. But it was literally the very next day that I was at this bar and somebody asked me if I was into musicals, and I said yes. In fact, I'd just seen The Sound of Music for the first time the night before. And before I could gush about my latest hyperfixation, she said, oh, if you only just saw The Sound of Music, you've lost all credibility in my mind. Ugh. Anyway, that's Kind of my supervillain origin story. That's why I was self-identifying as somebody who just can't get into musicals as recently as last year. I knew there were definitely some musicals I enjoyed, but I figured they were aberrations, outliers, exceptions that prove the rule. Between the end of college and late last year, the only 3 musicals I saw in theaters were La La Land, which I hated, though admittedly not because of anything to do with the music. Begin Again, which I liked a lot, but most musical fans forgot about that one just as soon as it was out of theaters. And Coco, which was my favorite film of 2017, but it sort of just felt like animated musicals didn't count at that point. Plus there's the whole, is it really a musical if all the songs are diegetic thing. And that's where things sat for over a decade. I always knew I wanted to circle back at some point, to really engage with the movie musical and figure out what I was missing. Because I genuinely hate being the only person who doesn't enjoy something. But my schedule was so busy for so long, and I knew I had to watch a lot of musicals if I was gonna get a proper sample size. And there was no telling how long I'd have to wait before I found myself stuck at home for weeks on end with nothing to do but to plow through some massive playlist of movie musicals. Where was I ever gonna find the time to suddenly see more? Part 2. The Great Quarantine Musical Binge of 2020. I watched about 25 movie musicals while in quarantine. The original list was like 35, 40, but I realized halfway through that I was never going to be able to talk about more than 24 in a single video. There are still plenty of musicals I need to see, but what's more important to me than which musicals I did or didn't watch in quarantine is what I learned from them, which is what we're going to talk about now. One of the first things I noticed when I started mainlining musicals was that I really like when they open in song. A lot of the musicals I knew I liked before quarantine start in song too. I think it's a great way to tell your audience, okay, we're gonna sing. There's gonna be singing. Get used to it. Be prepared to suspend that particular aspect of your disbelief. Mamma Mia starts in song, and I really like that about it.
I have a dream, a song to sing.
Oh, and it doesn't hurt that it then transitions into what's probably my favorite song in the whole film.
Honey, honey, how he thrills me, honey, honey.
It's just such a clever reframing of the ABBA song, where it's all about sex when Sophie's reading from her mom's diary, but then the song's suddenly about wanting to get to know someone when it's her internal monologue.
I wanted to know someone.
I remember when Mamma Mia first came out, the trailers hit, and I was like, oh, I didn't know these 3 guys could sing. And, well...
Those crazy years, that was the time of the flower power.
But, you know, it's encouraging, in a way. As someone who can't sing for beans, as someone who has real anxieties about letting other people hear him sing, listening to these guys belt it out with so little singing talent and so much enthusiasm is a great way for people like me to see that a love of music and the right to participate has little to do with natural inborn talent. This shot is brilliant. It should be shown at any film studies class. Little Shop of Horrors was one of those puppet musicals I'd watch regularly as a kid, and then for whatever reason I kind of forgot about it. But then I rewatched it in quarantine for the first time in years, and man, I connected with it in ways I hadn't felt since I last had hopes and dreams. It's about capitalism, the stress and depression that comes from the daily grind of having your labor exploited for someone else's benefit, the paradoxical desire to excel within an economic system that seeks to abuse you, and all the ways in which capitalism incentivizes and thrives on exploitation itself.
I don't know anyone who deserves to get chopped up and fed to a hungry plant.
Sure you do.
All set to some of the catchiest music of the whole genre.
You need blood and he's got more than enough.
So go get it.
Newsies turned out to be an interesting test case for me. I started and stopped it 3 separate times before I finally made it to the end. But in doing so, I think it helped me understand that sometimes I just need to be in the right headspace for any given film. The first time I heard those accents, I was just like,
Try Central Park, it's guaranteed.
Yeah, I can't do this. Came back a couple days later and I was like, okay, well, it's an affect. It's a bit. Still didn't like them though. Turned it off after about half an hour. But then the third time I was like, headlines don't sell papes, newsies sell papes. Newsies shares something in common with Little Shop of Horrors that I realized I like a lot. You can sort of tell they're not on location. It's a soundstage, but that's what I like about it. I think it helps me suspend my disbelief. Like, my brain recognizes that they're on a stage, so it has an easier time of going, okay, they're gonna break out into song and dance routines from time to time. Carrying the Banner is probably my favorite song from the film.
About a crooked politician.
Followed closely by The World Will Know. People tell me Seize the Day is most people's favorite, but I don't know, it's just got too much Macarena energy for me. Although I do love that it's a sort of pun. Seize the Day? More like seize the means of production. I was really excited to watch Les Mis for the same reason every musical nerd that I know hates it. Director Tom Hooper recorded all the singing live on set.
Cosette, I don't know what to say.
But that means there's no jarring switches from on-set audio to ADR. People who know more than nothing about music tell me this is actually a terrible idea, since the actors' bodies literally can't produce the proper notes when they're sitting down or doing heavy action like this. Which is why I know Britney Spears only either sings or dances in concert, never both at the same time. And while my untrained ear was definitely impressed with most of the vocal talents of this cast, especially Anne Hathaway, who moonshots every single scene she's in. Even I can tell the actors are doing a lot of huffing and puffing to get through some of their scenes. Ultimately, I think microphone technology has advanced far enough that when filmmakers switch from on-set audio to ADR, it's usually pretty hard to tell. So it seems to me like Les Mis ultimately lost more than it gained for doing this. Besides the actual singing, I couldn't really get into the story. I liked Fantine, but she was dead before Act 2, 158-year-old spoiler alert, and as much as I liked the story of Valjean being on the run for nearly 20 years from the maniacal Javert, there were just too many subplots for me to maintain my interest. These two get their own song? Sure, why not? Is this an act break? Your guess is as good as mine. Credit where credit's due though. One Day More is easily my second favorite anticipatory next day pump-up song of all time, with the first being, of course,
After all, there's only one more sleep till Christmas.
I've already kind of mentioned that one of the simplest ways to get me to suspend my disbelief is to make all your songs diegetic, which means that all the songs are sung in universe. Nobody's singing their feelings, they're literally just performing in the actual narrative. Lots of musicals sort of blur the line, including my three personal favorites. But there's very few purely diegetic musicals out there. Most people would call those musical biopics, like Walk the Line or Begin Again. But the most famous diegetic musical is probably Cabaret.
You have to understand the way I am, mein Herr. A tiger is a tiger, not a lamb, mein Herr.
Cabaret was a film I knew I had to see before I made this video because it's often billed as the musical for people who hate musicals. And of course, I really liked it. All but one of the songs in Cabaret are presented on the stage of the Kit Kat Club, which means there's absolutely no need to suspend my disbelief when people start singing. But more importantly, the story is just really honest and sad, and it isn't trying to make anyone feel artificially happy. It tells the story of a contentious bisexual love triangle between three on-again, off-again lovers in 1930s Berlin, just when the Nazis are starting to increase their political power.
Your paper and your party are pure crap, sir. Was haben Sie gesagt? I said, das ist lauter Scheiße!
The only song that isn't presented on the stage of the Kit Kat Club is this little kid singing Tomorrow Belongs to Me at a rural beer garden. And then we pan down and, yep, he's a Nazi. The dire political fate of the country feels intertwined with the fate of the characters and their relationships. They might hope to survive, but thriving isn't likely. Speaking of Berlin, diegetic musical performances, and contentious on-again, off-again lovers, one of my new favorite films, which I watched for the first time in quarantine, is Hedwig and the Angry Inch. It tells the story of Hedwig, a genderqueer German rock singer who immigrates to the United States after an American army man agrees to get married, but only if Hedwig... You know what? Maybe it's easier if we let Hedwig explain it.
Long story short! Yeah, long story short. When I woke up from the operation, I was bleeding down there. I was bleeding from the gash between my legs. It's my first day as a woman. Already it's that time of the month. But 2 days later, the hole closed up. The wound healed and I was left with a 1-inch mound of flesh.
So yeah, In the waning days of the Cold War, Hedwig suffers from a botched gender reassignment surgery in East Berlin, then marries an American army man and moves to the States, only for the army man to leave Hedwig without one word in the very next scene. And that's just the start of Act 2. The film is an exploration of Hedwig's complex personal history and gender identity, as revealed one song at a time through various musical performances, most of which are autobiographical. It contains both my all-time favorite Hitler joke,
Aber ich darf für unsere Sünden.
Da Hitler auch.
And my all-time favorite Jesus joke.
Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?
No, but I love his work.
The greatest endorsement I can think to give it is that it's only as brutal as it is empathic. I realize none of that has a whole lot to do with the music, but I do love the music too. It's employed in all my favorite ways, driving the plot forward, hiding exposition in these really fun, clever ways, and blurring the line between diegetic and non-diegetic musical performance. I honestly don't even know why I like that so much, but it pops up often enough in all my favorite musicals that it's clearly something that I prefer. There were a couple of musicals that I watched in quarantine that I didn't like, not because of the music, but because of some other narrative or thematic thing that rubbed me the wrong way. I guess I want to talk about these as proof that good music can't save an otherwise broken narrative. Not in my book anyway. Take Annie. Not to be a Marxist on Maine or anything, but where's the goddamn class solidarity? Annie gets adopted by Daddy Warbucks and the whole staff is like, we got Annie.
We got Annie.
We? What we? She's your client now, not your kid. To make matters worse, the villains of the third act are these greedy poors who scheme to steal the hard-earned wealth of this poor oppressed billionaire in order to improve their own economic standing. The scoundrels! The film's highest aspiration seems to be to join the ruling class and have a ball doing it. But then apparently the original Annie comic strip author Harold Gray was a hard-right anti-FDR conservative. So there you go. 1776 is another film that gives me pause, even though the music is lively and the presentation and staging are fun and clever.
Is that so? Well, if I'm the one to do it, they'll run their quill pens through it. I'm obnoxious and disliked, you know that, sir.
Yes, I know.
I can appreciate the fact that 1776 features an explicit call-out of the Founding Fathers' hypocrisy in declaring themselves the land of the free, even though so many of them own slaves.
They don't keep slaves. Oh, no. But they're willing to be considerable carriers of slaves to others.
With Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence itself, owning more slaves than any other president in American history. But look at how they deal with that in the film.
I have already resolved to release my slave.
But Jefferson never did that. He quite infamously refused to free all of his slaves even after he died. Not to mention there's a whole song at the start of Act 2 dedicated to what a good lover Jefferson is, and
Hi, 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 hi.
Let's just say if you haven't heard of Sally Hemings before, now would be a good time to Google her. When all the southern states walk out of Congress because the original draft of the Declaration features a condemnation of slavery, Ben Franklin solemnly persuades John Adams to remove it by appealing to the idea that such a short-term compromise will serve the interest of long-term progress.
The slavery clause has got to go.
Franklin, what are you saying?
It's a luxury we can't afford.
But see, Britain wound up abolishing slavery a whole generation before the United States. So what, if any, favors were the Founding Fathers really doing for the people that they themselves enslaved by declaring independence? But Serge, if you're not willing to accept that rationalization of the Founding Fathers' motives, what argument is left to help rehabilitate and contextualize their actions? What indeed? Okay, one last example of a musical I didn't like that had nothing to do with the music. Seven Brides for Seven Brothers is like one of the most beloved films of a generation. Your mom's generation, specifically. My mom's generation. This is literally my mom's favorite film. Hi, Mom. So the, story goes something like this. A middle-aged mountain man rides into town to find himself a bride.
Bless your beautiful hide, wherever you may be.
The town barmaid quickly agrees to marry him, mostly because she's sick of being the town barmaid, but once they get back to his cabin in the mountains, she finds out her new husband's got 6 younger brothers, and she's meant to cook and clean for all of them. To make matters worse, eventually the brothers all decide they want wives of their own, so they ride into town, and when their dancing doesn't convince any of the women to marry them on their own volition, they just up and kidnap some. They have no illusions about what they're doing, by the way. There's a whole song about the kidnapped war brides of Sabine, which is how they get the idea to kidnap some brides in the first place. It's literally called the Sobbin' Women.
Oh, yes, them women was sobbin', 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 fit to be tied.
Apparently, the Sobbin' Women was actually the working title of the film, until they decided they needed something more cheerful and they changed it to A Bride for Seven Brothers. But that made the censors raise their eyebrows, so they finally settled on Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. So they kidnap 6 potential brides, and it's basically all the first wife can do to convince the boys not to, marry them at gunpoint. They're held hostage in the mountains all winter, but by the time the snow melts and the townsfolk are ready to ride up and rescue them, the women have all decided, mostly off camera, that they actually like their captors.
Oh, they say when you marry in June, you're a bride all your life.
And spontaneously arrange shotgun weddings for themselves.
A while back I heard a wee babe crying in the house. Whose is it? Whose is it? Don't be afraid to tell.
Mine!
And that's how the movie ends.
We do.
And I said, why?
Now I know some smartass in the comments is gonna say that that's the exact same plot of Beauty and the Beast. And just as soon as we figure out where you're keeping your brain these days, I'll be happy to explain why it's not. There's 2 more films I want to talk about, precisely because I've already talked about them. I mentioned the Producers in Chicago at the beginning of the video as 2 examples of musicals that failed to impress me when I first watched them. Well, I rewatched both of them in quarantine, and I now have new opinions. I still think The Producers is little more than a filmed staging of the theatrical musical, without any of the magic of the stage. But this is probably one of my all-time favorite stories about show business.
This is it!
Not so much a film about gay people and Nazis and gay Nazis, so much as how we depict them in our media. And when the jokes hit home, they really hit home.
Gregor Samsa awoke one morning to discover that he had been transformed into a giant cockroach. Nah, too good.
Chicago 2 is a film I didn't like very much back when I first saw it in the mid-2000s, but that didn't have much to do with the music. It was more because I didn't really care about Roxy. It isn't even fun to root for her in an I want the bad guy to win sort of way. How much of an underdog is she really when she's got an attorney who's literally never lost a case?
I mean, he's never lost a case for a female client yet.
It doesn't help that every single woman in the Cell Block Tango has a backstory that's 10 times more interesting than hers. But when I said as much on Twitter, people were actually very helpful in pointing out that Roxy isn't meant to be likable. She's not a hero. She's barely even a protagonist. She's just some dope who happened to come out on top because of this vapid, cutthroat entertainment world that values bow tie lips and hemlines over human life. This I dig. I like this a lot. It's a movie about a world rather than a single person.
Sweetest little jazz killer ever to hit Chicago. That's the angle I'm after.
You'd think the title might have clued me in. I mean, I'd offer to give back my film studies degree, but it's really not worth the paper it's printed on. I also mentioned Repo the Genetic Opera as an example of a film I saw in high school that didn't really impress me. I rewatched that one in quarantine too, and let me just say, if ever there was a time to watch a glitzy, trashy on purpose rock opera about a public health crisis where the government abandons its people in order to be taken over by the corporations, it's in the middle of a pandemic. Rewatching The Producers in Chicago was exciting. I like being able to suss out how a film is meant to be enjoyed, even 18 years after the fact. Pleas to Twitter aside, I felt like I was getting pretty decent at figuring out how to appreciate most musicals on their own terms. Like when I first saw Rocky Horror, I was like, oh, this isn't for me, but I totally get the appeal.
I see you shiver with anticipation.
And I wanted to see how far I could push it. I wanted to watch a musical that I specifically didn't think I would like, just to test how well I'd learn to appreciate a film for what it is, rather than anything that it's not. So what's a musical that demands more faith from its audience than perhaps any other? What's a musical that can only be appreciated through the most hyper-narrow focus intended by the filmmakers? A musical that demands we give the filmmakers all benefit of the doubt. No, not Cats. Look, Cats is just a horny fever dream adaptation of a fascist sympathizer's children's book. I've had Cats pegged from day one. No, I've got a different musical in mind. In honor of the late in honor of the in honor of the late departed Joel Schumacher. Joel Schumacher's Phantom of the Opera is a musical that not even Phantom of the Opera fans seem to like very much. I'm not trying to speak for the fandom here, that's just what I read when I Google this movie. Now that I've watched it, the biggest criticism I could give it is that it's the first Schumacher film that ever bored me. Ultimately, there's no spinning that. There's no fixing it. I didn't like it. But I still think I can appreciate the intent well enough. It's an adaptation of the stage musical if you knew the stage musical was never going to be staged ever again. Why do the candles rise up out of the water and self-ignite? Is it because the Phantom is some sort of genius electrical engineer with unlimited technical resources? No, silly. It's because that's what happened in the stage musical. They did make some changes though, like we see the Phantom way more often in the movie, and they added a quick little sword fight here in the cemetery, so I guess every now and then Schumacher was like, oh crap, some people have actually seen the stage show, so I guess we better do something. In the end, I wouldn't exactly say I enjoyed Phantom of the Opera on account of its being big, boring, and obvious, but I'm still not sorry I saw it, if for nothing else. Watching Phantom of the Opera made it overwhelmingly clear to me that there can be problems with a musical that have nothing to do with the music.
Damn you! Curse you!
Part 3. So what, at long last, do I think of musicals? So all told, I think the secret to getting me to like a musical is to get me to suspend my disbelief. That's one of the first things I mentioned in the video, and it's what I keep coming back to. I think that's why animated musicals tend to have such a good track record, at least with me. They're cartoons, not real life, so it's easier to imagine someone bursting into song at any moment, and there's never any jarring switch from the onset audio to ADR, because it's all ADR. Everything I like about live-action musicals feeds into this, starting in song, blurring the line between diegetic and non-diegetic musical numbers, fantastical elements in the story. All that goes towards helping me suspend my disbelief. That's really the silver bullet, I think, when it comes to getting me to like a musical. What helps now is that if I watch a musical and it doesn't do that very well, I might realize that's what's bothering me, which will then help me to look past it. Everything else just comes down to good writing like any screenplay. Are the songs enhancing the drama, driving the plot forward, hiding exposition, raising the stakes? The first thing I did when I started scripting this video was to sit down and come up with a list of every single musical I'd ever seen, both before and during quarantine, and sort them into a very crude binary of musicals I could at least appreciate and musicals I couldn't. This was a very unscientific process, mind you. Like, I remember liking Jonah, a VeggieTales movie back in middle school, but I'm not about to rewatch it now to see whether or not I still like it. But eventually I made all my tallies, and you know what I found out? Out of a total 52 musicals I could remember seeing, I liked 33 of them. That's a 63% approval rating. That's better than the Marvel movies. But you want to know what the real kicker was? Just for fun, I made a list of all the musicals I'd seen before quarantine, back when I self-identified as somebody who didn't like musicals. And at the final tally, wouldn't you know if the approval rating wasn't even higher? 66%. 2/3. So, not only do I no longer identify as somebody who just can't get into musicals, I have real hard scientific data which indicates I never should have. Looking back on it, I think there were 3 reasons why I did that. The first was the gatekeeping. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that that had no effect. First, people told me I was weird for not liking musicals. Then they told me I wasn't liking them in the right ways. It was really just 3 friends. Alex, Adam, and Laura, you know who you are. Actually, you can know who Alex is too. He has his own YouTube channel, 9 Wheels, which I'll link below, who kept the fire stoked all these years and encouraged me to explore musicals on my own terms. The second factor, I think, was your stereotypical, internalized, heteropatriarchal bullshit. Right about when most kids who embed themselves within the musical fandom are figuring out which adaptation of Les Mis is their favorite, I was going through my 6th annual summer of compulsory Little League. And here's the thing, even though I hated team sports, I leaned into that stuff hard. For years, throughout mostly middle school, I thought, man, if only I could hit enough home runs or act tough enough or have a performative interest in throwing knives, then maybe finally I'll feel good about myself as a person. Disregarding musicals was probably an unfortunate side effect of all that.
No music!
And the third reason is, I can't sing. I can't dance. I've got no natural talent, and I never had enough fun doing it poorly to ever practice consistently. I touched on this in my last AMA, but basically, when you learn a new skill, you generally go through 4 phases. The first is unconscious incompetence, when you're maybe not that great at something, but you don't know you're not great at it yet, so you keep going. The second step is conscious incompetence, when it feels like you're actually getting worse for a while, but really you're just getting better at spotting where you need to improve. The third step is conscious competence, where you're starting to get good at what you do, but only by being hyper aware of what you're doing and what you want to do next. Finally, step 4 is unconscious conscious competence, when you're doing well enough to satisfy your own judgment and the level of effort isn't something you dread. That's the pinnacle, man. That's all I ever want out of life. But when it came to singing, I skipped over step 1 and never made it past step 2. I was only ever hyper aware of how bad I was, and I was honestly too embarrassed to ever try to improve. Now that might make for a perfectly fine explanation, but it's a piss poor excuse. What's the point of codifying skill acquisition like this at all if I'm not going to use this understanding to try and push past step 2 and finally get better at something I might enjoy, like I did with watching musicals? I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think I'm gonna start singing. Practice singing anyway. It's something I want to do, and something I understand I need to be willing to do poorly in order to get better. And I feel like I have you all to thank for that. There's no telling how long it would have taken me to finally make this video if you all weren't pushing for it. And I never would have made it in the middle of a pandemic if demand hadn't been so high. Nero fiddled, you know? But you know what? I feel like watching these musicals did me a lot of good, in quarantine specifically. If only because it helped make room in my head for something other than doom scrolling all day long. Now I've got a musicals playlist on my phone, about 20 more musicals on my watch list, and a whole new vocal range to explore. Not right now, though. Jesus, not on camera, not in public. What, did you think this video was gonna end with a musical number or something? This video was sponsored by Frome.co. Frome creates beautiful canvas art centerpieces that depict the chromatic chronologies of your favorite films, with each color strip representing each sequential frame in a given film. Ready to know what this one is? It's Beauty and the Beast. This strip of tan here is Belle's I want adventure in the great wide somewhere moment, and this dark swath of red here is Gaston's song, and this bright pink and neon blue, that's Be Our Guest. This was the first Frome canvas I ever hung up and actually watched the movie alongside it, and it's quite an experience. You learn a lot, not just about the color palette of the film, but also scene duration and emotional temperatures. They also just look great. One of my favorite things about Frome is the selection. When I first decided I was going to do a video about musicals, I had so many to choose from. Just some of their musical selections include The Sound of Music, Moulin Rouge, The Blues Brothers, Nightmare Before Christmas, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, Mamma Mia, Coco, The Road to El Dorado, Rocky Horror, Phantom of the Opera, Mulan, Aladdin, The Lion King, Hercules, and not just Grease, but Grease 2, which have completely different color palettes. Who knew? And they put out new ones every week based on public suggestions. A few weeks back, I was thinking about 3 specific films that I wanted to see in their catalog, and when I went back a couple days later to suggest them, turns out they'd already been added to the collection. They even went and added the relatively obscure Godzilla vs. Destroya on my suggestion. So if you're in the market for an expertly stylized canvas art centerpiece that says as much about a given film as it does your taste in movies, head on over to frome.co/coldcrashpictures, where you can get 10% off your order by using the referral link frome.co/coldcrashpictures. No discount code needed. Just follow the link in the description of this video. That's frome.co/coldcrashpictures.
The time slip.
And nothing can ever be the same.
You're spaced out on sensation.
Like you're under